Stella Morrison's GPS had died 3 blocks ago, leaving her stranded on a street that looked nothing like the real estate listings had promised. The neighborhood was predominantly black, economically struggling, and the kind of place her real estate agent had warned her away from with subtle language about investment risk and neighborhood trajectory. Stella was 39 years old, with pale skin that burned easily, naturally blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and green eyes that were currently wide with a mixture of fear and disorientation. Her designer clothes, white linen blazer and perfectly tailored slacks, screamed privilege in a neighborhood that had nothing to do with people like her. She sat in her silver Mercedes, locked doors, trying to call her agent when a tap on the window made her jump. Devon Washington stood outside her car, mid-40s, with deep mahogany skin, close-cropped dark hair starting to gray at the temples, and warm brown eyes that showed immediate concern rather than threat. He wore work clothes, jeans, and a collared shirt, and carried a toolbox, suggesting he'd just finished a job. His presence was solid, grounded, unthreatening. Stella rolled down her window slightly, her hand still trembling on the control. "You lost?" Devon asked, his voice calm and measured. "My GPS died," Stella said, her voice higher than she intended. "I'm trying to find the Riverside Development Project. The new construction on... That's 6 blocks back the way you came," Devon said. He pointed with his toolbox. "But ma'am, I gotta tell you, that neighborhood and this one are completely different. You come to Riverside, you're coming to a gentrification project. You're here. You're in a community that's been here for 40 years. Stella's face flushed. "I wasn't trying to... my real estate agent said..." "Your agent steered you away from here on purpose," Devon said, not unkindly. "They do that. They tell people this neighborhood is transitioning or up and coming, when what they mean is there's too many black people here for comfortable white investment. But then they show you Riverside, which is literally being built on top of where we used to be. They call it development. We call it displacement." Stella had never heard anyone say it so directly. She'd been raised in suburban Connecticut, had gone to Ivy League schools, had worked in finance her entire life. The mechanisms of systemic racism had always been polite, coded, plausible. They'd never been stated plainly by someone standing outside her car. "I didn't mean to. I'm sorry," she said. "You didn't know," Devon replied. "Most people don't. They just follow the directions they're given and never question who those directions are protecting or excluding." He stepped back from the car. "Riverside is back the way you came. Safe investment for someone like you." Stella should have driven away. She should have gone to Riverside, bought her condo, continued her life. But something about Devon's honesty, about being forced to see the mechanisms usually hidden, made her pause. "What's your name?" she asked. "Devon Washington." "And you are?" "Stella Morrison." She paused. "What would happen if I didn't go to Riverside?" Devon looked at her for a long moment. "Honestly? Nothing would happen to you. You'd come here, you'd buy a property, your presence would increase property values for some people and force out others. That's gentrification. That's how it works." "Is that what you think I want?" Stella asked. "I think you want to feel like you made a good investment," Devon said. "I think your real estate agent wants a commission. I think the developers want profit. And I think the people who've lived here for 4 decades want to stay in their homes. Those things are in conflict." Stella sat with that. She'd spent her career optimizing systems, finding efficiency, maximizing returns. She'd never thought about what systems optimized for or who they optimized toward. "What if I didn't buy in Riverside?" "Then you'd disappoint your agent and your investment strategy. You'd also not participate in displacement. Your choice." Devon walked away, leaving Stella alone in her car with directions and the first real moral question she'd faced in years. "Hello, the Shade of Love family. We just opened with the moment that many of you have experienced, being shown only parts of reality based on assumptions about who you are. Have you ever been steered away from or towards something based on race or class? Drop a if this resonates. Your stories matter. Hit like if you're ready to see how one honest conversation changes everything, and subscribe for more stories of transformation and truth. Stella didn't go to Riverside. Instead, she drove back through the neighborhood, parked her car, and walked. Really walked, looking at the streets, the businesses, the people. She saw a community center with its windows boarded up. She saw a corner store with security bars. She saw a row of beautiful brownstones, some maintained beautifully, others slowly deteriorating. She saw what 40 years of disinvestment looked like when you actually looked. By evening, she'd found a small coffee shop and was sitting with a cold brew, laptop open, researching. The neighborhood was called Westbrook. It had once been thriving, had housed multiple generations of black families, had been a center of culture and community. Then the highways came through in the 60s, splitting the neighborhood in half. Then the jobs left. Then the investment dried up. Then the banks started redlining, refusing to give mortgages in neighborhoods like this, ensuring that wealth couldn't accumulate through home ownership. She called her mother that night, something she almost never did. "I'm not buying in Riverside," Stella said. Her mother, Patricia Morrison, 65 years old with white blonde hair and Stella's same pale skin, responded with confusion. "Why not? Your agent said it was an excellent investment." "Because it's built on displacement," Stella said. "Because my investment would directly cause people to lose their homes." There was a long silence. Patricia had built her wealth through real estate, through exactly this kind of strategic investment. She'd never questioned where the profit came from. "Stella, investments aren't moral," Patricia said finally. "They're financial instruments." "But people experience them as moral," Stella replied. "People lose their homes after hanging up." Stella sat alone in her apartment, a rental in a safe, gentrified neighborhood, and felt the weight of realizing that the life she'd built was built on systems that harmed others. That wasn't comfortable knowledge. The next morning, she called Devon. She'd gotten his number from the coffee shop owner who knew him as a contractor who did community repair work. "I want to understand this neighborhood better," Stella said when he answered. "Would you be willing to show me around?" "Officially?" "I'll pay for your time." Devon was quiet. Then, "Why?" "Because I want to see it the way you see it. Not as an investment opportunity, but as a community." He agreed to meet her the next Saturday at the community center with the boarded-up windows. When Stella arrived, she found him talking to an older black woman named Dorothy, who ran programs out of the center despite limited funding. "Devon says you're interested in Westbrook," Dorothy said, assessing Stella with eyes that had seen a lot. Dorothy was 73, with dark skin lined with wisdom, gray hair in natural curls, and an energy that suggested she'd spent her whole life fighting for something. "I want to understand it," Stella said. Dorothy spent the next 3 hours showing Stella what Westbrook had been and what it could be. She showed her photos of the neighborhood in its prime. Beautiful buildings, thriving businesses, children playing safely in parks. She showed her the community center, which had once served 5,000 residents and now served maybe 200 due to funding cuts. She introduced Stella to other residents, all of whom had different stories but similar themes. Love for their community, anger at abandonment, fear of displacement. Devon watched from a distance as Stella listened. Really listened, taking notes, asking questions that went deeper than surface level. He saw her struggle with complicity, with understanding that her privilege was built on others' exclusion. "You don't have to fix this," Devon told her later as they walked through the neighborhood. "You're one person. The system is massive, but I can choose not to participate in it," Stella replied. "I can choose where I invest. I can choose who I support. Can you?" Devon asked. "Really? Or will the pressure to succeed, to build wealth, to do what you've been taught, eventually override that choice?" Stella didn't have an answer, but the question stayed with her. Stella spent the next 2 weeks diving deeper. She learned that Westbrook had been systematically disinvested through redlining policies that were technically illegal, but practically enforced. She learned that property values had declined not because of the community's fault, but because of deliberate policy decisions made decades ago that still echoed. She learned that real estate investment firms actively bought properties here at low prices, displaced residents, and then sold to developers at massive markups. She also started spending more time with Devon. They'd meet for coffee, walk the neighborhood, talk about systems and power and complicity. Devon was a contractor who'd grown up in Westbrook, had watched his parents struggle to maintain their home as the neighborhood deteriorated, and had committed his life to community repair work, fixing buildings, helping residents, organizing for resources. One evening, sitting on the steps of the community center as the sun set over Chicago, Stella asked him the question that had been building in her. "Why didn't you just leave? Get out of the neighborhood, build a life somewhere else?" Devon looked at her for a long time. Because leaving is the solution offered to individuals. It doesn't fix the system. It just moves the problem. And also, he paused, this is my home. These are my people. Why should I have to leave because the system failed us? That's not fair, Stella said. No, Devon agreed. It's not. The next week, Stella discovered something that changed everything. She was researching property ownership in Westbrook when she found that her own company, Morrison Financial Group, which her mother chaired, held significant investments in real estate funds that specifically targeted disinvested communities for displacement and gentrification. The funds bought low, displaced residents quickly, sold high. The profit margins were substantial. Stella's own wealth, the money she'd inherited and built upon, came partially from this mechanism. She called her mother immediately. We're profiting from displacement, Stella said. No preamble. Stella, our fund managers handle the investments. We don't make individual decisions about, Mom, I know what's happening. I know that our portfolio specifically targets communities like Westbrook. I know we buy properties, force out residents, and flip for profit. I know exactly what's happening. Patricia was quiet. Then, that's how investments work, sweetheart. That's how wealth is built. It's how wealth is stolen, Stella said. It's how communities are destroyed so that people like us can get richer. You're being emotional, Patricia said, using the tone that had shut down Stella's questions her entire childhood. But Stella wasn't being emotional. She was being clear. I want Morrison Financial to divest from those funds. Absolutely not, Patricia said. Our shareholders depend on those returns. Stella hung up, knowing that she'd reached an impasse with her mother, with her family, with the entire system of wealth that had raised her. She sat in her apartment that night and made a decision that would change everything. She called Devon. I want to invest in Westbrook, she said, but I want to do it differently. I want to invest in keeping people in their homes, not forcing them out. I want to help residents buy their properties, avoid displacement. I want to invest in the community's vision for itself, not in gentrification. That's a different kind of investment, Devon said carefully. That doesn't build wealth the traditional way. I know, Stella said, but I'm done with traditional wealth. I'm done with profit that comes from harm. There was a long silence. Then Devon said, You understand that this will cost you? Your family, your career, your social position? I'm starting to, Stella replied. But I can't unknow what I know. I can't pretend the system is neutral when I've seen exactly how it harms people. Devon brought Stella to a community meeting in Westbrook. She sat in the back, uncomfortable in her designer clothes, watching as residents discussed their collective future. The meeting was led by Marcus Thompson, a community organizer in his 50s with deep brown skin, close-cropped gray hair, and an intensity that came from years of fighting for justice. Also present was Harold Jackson, a 70-year-old resident who'd lived in Westbrook his entire life, and Maya Rodriguez, a young Latina activist who worked on housing justice. Stella listened as they discussed the predatory investors circling the neighborhood, the displacement pressures, the need for community-controlled development. She listened as they talked about their fears and their hopes. And then, without planning to, she raised her hand. I'm Stella Morrison, she said. I'm from outside this community, and I have connections to financial systems that have harmed Westbrook. I want to help. I want to invest in community-controlled development that keeps people in their homes. The room went quiet. Marcus Thompson looked at her with an expression that was suspicious but not dismissive. What exactly are you offering? Capital, Stella said. Access to financing that doesn't come with gentrification. I can structure it so that residents maintain ownership and control, but I need to understand what the community actually wants, not what I think you need. After the meeting, Marcus pulled her aside. He was 47, with mahogany-colored skin, close-cropped dark hair with gray at the temples, and dark eyes that saw straight through performance. His presence was solid, commanding, the kind that came from having fought for something real. You seem sincere, Marcus said, but sincerity doesn't mean anything if you're not willing to actually change the systems that benefit you. Are you willing to do that? I'm starting to, Stella said, but I need help understanding how. Marcus studied her for a long moment. Okay, we'll work together. But understand, this isn't about making you feel better about your privilege. This is about justice, real justice, not performative justice. Over the next weeks, Stella and Marcus met repeatedly. She brought financial expertise. He brought community knowledge and moral clarity. They designed an investment structure that would allow residents to purchase their homes at below-market rates, with community control over development, with guarantees against displacement. It was complex work, and it required Stella to make compromises with her previous worldview. She had to accept that she didn't know better than the community. She had to accept that justice meant giving power away, not centralizing it. She had to accept that her role was to support, not to lead. One evening, working late in the community center, Marcus explained the deeper system they were fighting. He told her about redlining, about how his parents had been denied mortgages based on race, about how that one denial had cascading effects across generations. He told her about systemic racism not as individual prejudice, but as embedded policy. Stella listened with the specific hunger of someone learning to see the world differently. "Why didn't anyone teach me this?" she asked. "Because it benefits people like you to not know," Marcus said simply. "Ignorance is comfortable. Knowledge requires action." As weeks turned into months, something shifted between them. It was subtle at first. Longer eye contact, hands that lingered when passing documents, conversations that extended past their professional necessity. Stella found herself thinking about Marcus's dark eyes, the way he moved with quiet confidence, the depth of his commitment to justice. Marcus found himself admiring Stella's willingness to question everything she'd been taught, her courage in choosing differently, her growing understanding of systemic racism. Neither of them acted on it. The power dynamics were complicated. Marcus was the community representative. Stella was the wealthy white woman with resources. But the attraction was undeniable, present in every interaction, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. Stella's decision to invest in Westbrook caused immediate family friction. Patricia Morrison called emergency board meetings. She called Stella repeatedly. She made it clear that supporting community development that didn't maximize profit was not only foolish, but a betrayal of family values. "Your father built Morrison Financial on strategic investment," Patricia said over lunch at an exclusive restaurant. Patricia was pale, blonde, elegant, and furious. "And you're throwing it away on a neighborhood that will never appreciate your sacrifice." "I'm not doing this for appreciation," Stella said. "I'm doing it because it's right." "Right doesn't pay dividends," Patricia snapped. "Right doesn't build wealth. Right is a luxury of people who have the security to afford principles." But Stella was learning that right was the only luxury that mattered. She formally separated her personal investments from Morrison Financial's portfolio. She liquidated her inheritance and redirected it toward community development in Westbrook. She walked away from the life her family had built for her. Her friends, mostly wealthy white women from her social circle, couldn't understand. They called her a traitor. They suggested she was going through a phase. They made clear that her choices had consequences. But in Westbrook, she found community. She found purpose. She found Marcus. Marcus was going through his own transformation. He'd spent decades assuming that people like Stella, wealthy, white, privileged, were the enemy. But Stella had forced him to complicate that assumption. She'd forced him to see that systems could change, that people could change, that justice could include unlikely allies. They began spending time together outside of community meetings. They grabbed coffee. They walked the neighborhood and talked about how it could be. They shared meals at small restaurants. And slowly, carefully, they began to see each other not as representatives of opposing forces, but as two people finding connection across deep divides. One evening, working late at the community center, Marcus finally said what had been building between them. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said. His dark eyes were vulnerable, a stark contrast to his usual controlled intensity. "And I know that's complicated because of who you are and where you come from, and because you represent systems that have harmed this community. But Stella, you chose differently. You chose us. You chose this community. And I don't know what to do with that." Stella felt her heart rate increase. "I chose you," she said quietly. "Or I'm choosing you. I don't know if that's wise, but it's what I want." "It's not wise," Marcus said, but he was moving closer to her. "It's complicated and messy, and it will cause problems for both of us." "I know," Stella said, "but I want it anyway." They kissed then, in the community center late at night, surrounded by the work they were doing together. It was tentative at first, both of them aware of the complexity. Then it deepened, became urgent. became the specific passion of two people choosing each other despite everything that should keep them apart. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said. "Everything has already changed," Stella replied. "We're just acknowledging it." Hello, the Shade of Love family. We're at the turning point, where attraction becomes commitment, and two people choose each other across systems designed to keep them separate. Have you ever had to choose between comfort and justice? Have you ever loved someone despite the complications? Drop a if this resonates with your story. Share your experience in the comments. Your voices matter. Hit like if you're ready to see how love and justice intertwine, and subscribe for more transformative stories. Over the next months, Stella and Marcus built their relationship in the spaces between activism and love. They worked on community development during the day and fell deeper into each other at night. Stella moved into a modest apartment in Westbrook, rejecting the luxury she'd known her whole life. Marcus introduced her to his family. His mother, Patricia, different from Stella's mother, a widow who'd raised Marcus alone. His sister, Keisha. His extended community. Patricia Washington was 68. With deep brown skin, gray hair, and natural twists, and the protective energy of a mother who'd fought her whole life to provide for her son. She assessed Stella carefully when Marcus brought her home for dinner. "You're the white girl from outside," Patricia said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Stella confirmed. She wasn't going to pretend or minimize. "I'm from outside Westbrook, I'm white, and I come from wealth that was partially built on systems that harmed communities like yours." Patricia studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled slightly. "At least you're honest about it. Come help me in the kitchen." In the kitchen, Patricia told Stella stories about Marcus growing up, about raising him alone after his father died, about the choices she'd had to make to keep him safe in a world that saw him as a threat. She told her about the fear of having a black son in America, about the constant vigilance required, about the specific pain of loving someone so much and not being able to protect them from the world. "He's a good man," Patricia said. "He's committed to justice because he understands injustice in his bones. I need you to understand what that means. It means he will always choose the community before himself. He will always prioritize justice before comfort. If you're with him, you need to accept that." "I understand," Stella said. "Do you?" Patricia asked. "Because it's easy to commit to justice when you have the privilege to step back. Marcus doesn't have that privilege. For him, this is survival." The word stayed with Stella. That night, she and Marcus lay together in his small apartment, and she asked him directly, "Am I enough? Can you love me knowing what I come from, knowing the systems I benefit from?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he said finally. "I want to, but there's always going to be that awareness that you can leave this if it gets too hard. And I can't. That your worst day here is still better than my best day in the system I grew up in." "What if I don't leave?" Stella asked. "What if I stay?" "Then we'll figure it out," Marcus said. "But you have to understand what you're choosing. You're choosing a life of struggle. You're choosing to give up the privilege that made you comfortable." "I'm choosing you," Stella said. "Everything else is just details." Marcus pulled her closer, but she could feel the weight of reality between them, the real complications that wouldn't disappear with love or good intentions. The next test came when Morrison Financial made a move. Patricia, Stella's mother, had decided to invest heavily in the very gentrification that Stella was fighting against. A major development project was being announced for Westbrook, one that would displace residents and transform the neighborhood into luxury housing. Stella's mother called her. "We'd like you to come back," Patricia said. "The board is offering you a position managing the Westbrook project. You'd be well compensated. You could make real money." "You could come home?" "That's not my home anymore," Stella said. "And I won't help displace people." "You're throwing away your future," Patricia said, her voice cold. "Your father would be ashamed." Stella hung up without responding. That night, she told Marcus what had happened. "My company is going to try to displace everyone here," she said. "My family, my money, my privilege. It's being used as a weapon against your community. So we fight it," Marcus said simply. "We've been preparing for this. We have documentation, community support, legal strategies. We'll fight it." "With my help?" Stella asked. "Can I help without it feeling like I'm only helping to absolve myself?" "You help because it's right," Marcus said, "not because it makes you feel better. There's a difference. The gentrification project that Morrison Financial proposed was comprehensive and brutal. The plan called for demolishing existing affordable housing and replacing it with luxury condos. The displacement would be swift and total. Elderly residents would be forced out. Families would lose homes their parents and grandparents had owned. The community would be erased. Stella received the project proposal and felt physical nausea. The language was so clean, so professional. It was called Strategic Urban Renewal. The actual impact, displacement, community destruction, cultural erasure, was buried in euphemism. She brought copies to Marcus and the community organizing team. They sat in the community center, reviewing the proposal, understanding exactly what was being proposed. "This is systematic erasure," Harold Jackson said. He was the elder who Stella had met months ago. Harold had lived in Westbrook for 73 years. "They want us gone. Every last one of us. Not just gone," Marcus said. "Forgotten. They want to rebuild this neighborhood in their image, and if we were never here, that's cleaner. That's easier." That night, Marcus and Stella had their hardest conversation yet. They lay in bed, and Marcus said what he'd been thinking but hadn't wanted to voice. "This is where your privilege becomes a problem," he said quietly. "Your mother, your family money, your connections, they're all being used to destroy my community." "You can leave that." "You did leave that, but the system doesn't stop because you personally opted out." "What do you want me to do?" Stella asked. "I want you to use what you have," Marcus said. "Use your connections to stop this project. Use your knowledge of finance to find vulnerabilities. Use your privilege as a weapon against the system, not for it." "Okay," Stella said. "How?" Over the next week, Stella became someone she'd never imagined being. She called in favors from her old network. She reached out to lawyers she'd gone to school with. She used her connections in finance to understand the funding structure of Morrison Financial's project and found where the vulnerabilities were. She discovered that the project was being financed partially through pension funds, which meant that teachers, firefighters, and other working-class people were funding their own displacement. She discovered that the project was receiving tax breaks from the city that were being granted on false pretenses. She discovered that the environmental impact study had been falsified. With this information, Stella went to the media. She held a press conference where she, as a former executive of Morrison Financial, detailed the company's practices and the specific ways this project was corrupt. Patricia Morrison watched the press conference on television and called her daughter immediately. "You've destroyed yourself," she said, her voice cold. "No," Stella replied. "I've finally started building something real." After that, Stella was officially cut off from her family. No inheritance, no trust fund, no connections, just her education, her skills, and her choice to stand with Westbrook. But the project was halted. Investigations were opened into Morrison Financial's practices, and Stella became someone else entirely, not the privileged white woman she'd been, but a person with agency and integrity. Marcus found her in the community center the night the project was officially canceled. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him shaking slightly. "You sacrificed everything," he said. "I sacrificed comfort," Stella corrected. "I kept what matters, you, this community, integrity. Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "Not for a second," Stella said. "My old life was built on other people's pain. This life is built on justice. I know which one I choose." 6 months after the gentrification project was halted, Marcus stood in the community center with Stella on a Saturday afternoon. He was nervous in a way she'd rarely seen him be. His dark eyes showed vulnerability. His confident posture wavered slightly. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Okay," Stella said, her pale skin flushing as she understood what was coming. "I love you," Marcus said. "And you've proven that you love this community, that you're committed to justice, that you're willing to sacrifice everything for what's right. I love you for all of that, but I also love you because you make me believe that change is possible, that people can transform, that love can survive across divides that seemed impossible to cross." He pulled out a ring, not an expensive diamond, but a beautiful band made by a local jeweler from Westbrook, incorporating gold and conflict-free stones. "Will you marry me?" Marcus asked. "Will you build a life with me here, in this community, fighting for justice together?" Stella was crying before she could answer. "Yes," she said. "Yes, absolutely yes." They kissed as residents of the community center cheered. Harold Jackson, now 74, cried happy tears. Patricia Washington held her hands to her chest, finally believing that her son had found someone who truly saw him. They got married 3 months later in the Westbrook Community Center, the place where they'd first worked together, first fought together, first loved together. The celebration was a true community event. Residents brought food, musicians performed, dancers danced. The wedding blended elements of both their worlds. Stella's family was conspicuously absent, but her father's best friend came and wept at seeing his goddaughter choose justice over privilege. Marcus's entire extended family was there, dancing, singing, celebrating. Stella wore a dress designed by a local fashion designer from the community. Marcus wore a suit tailored by another local business. Their wedding cake was made by a baker who'd lived in Westbrook for 40 years. Every detail was intentional. Every choice supported the community that had raised Marcus and now welcomed Stella. "I'm starting consulting work," Stella told Marcus on their wedding night. They were in a small apartment in Westbrook, nothing like the luxury spaces she'd known. It was perfect. "I want to help other communities that are being targeted for gentrification. I want to use my knowledge to protect people." "Who's your first client?" Marcus asked, pulling her close. "The Westbrook Community Development Trust," Stella said. "We're going to make sure that this community controls its own future. Not developers, not investors, not outside forces, us." Marcus held her, understanding what she'd become. Not a traitor to her class, but a person who'd chosen integrity over comfort, love over isolation, justice over privilege. "My mother wants to know if you're pregnant yet," Marcus said, amused. "Tell her to be patient," Stella laughed. "But eventually, yes. I want to have children here, raise them knowing both their heritage and their responsibility to community. You understand that our children will face racism I've experienced? That being with me means understanding that?" "I understand," Stella said. "And I'm committed to raising children who resist that, who understand systemic racism, who use their privilege, which they'll have because of me, because of who their parents are, to fight for justice." Hello, the Shade of Love family. Stella and Marcus just got married, united in their commitment to justice and love. This is what real allyship looks like. Not perfection, but transformation. Not saviorism, but partnership. Have you experienced love that crosses divides? Have you had to choose justice over comfort? Drop A and share your story in the comments. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more tales of transformation, justice, and authentic love. 1 year after their wedding, Stella and Marcus stood in the newly renovated Westbrook Community Center, which had just been transformed into a hub for community development, education, and activism. The building gleamed with fresh paint and new equipment, funded partially by Stella's consulting work and partially by community resources. Marcus, now 48, wore his responsibility visibly. His dark skin showed the weight of leading this movement. His eyes carried the intensity of someone fighting for liberation. Stella, pale-skinned and blonde, stood beside him in work clothes, no longer dressed to impress but dressed to work. Together, they announced a new initiative, the Westbrook Resident Protection Fund. The fund would help longtime residents purchase their homes at controlled prices, preventing displacement and ensuring community ownership of development. It would be managed by the community, controlled by residents, structured to ensure that wealth stayed within Westbrook rather than flowing to outside investors. "This isn't charity," Marcus explained to the gathered media and community members. "This is justice. This is acknowledging that communities like Westbrook have been systematically disinvested while being simultaneously targeted for gentrification. This fund corrects that injustice." Stella added context that only she could provide. "I come from money that profited from these systems. I'm using that knowledge and those resources to help dismantle them. But this fund isn't about my redemption. It's about community power. It's about residents controlling their own futures." Harold Jackson, now 75 and frail but still present, placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "This is what justice looks like," he said. "Not just stopping the harm, but building something better." Over the next 6 months, the fund helped 17 families purchase their homes. Property values stabilized rather than skyrocketing. The neighborhood remained affordable. Young people who'd grown up in Westbrook could now afford to stay. Families didn't have to leave. Patricia Washington, Marcus's mother, sat in her son's office at the community center and watched as Stella worked, reviewing documents, taking calls, organizing strategy. Patricia was now 70, her dark hair fully gray, her brown eyes wise but softened by what she was witnessing. "Thank you," Patricia told Stella one afternoon. "For what?" Stella asked. "For loving my son like he deserves to be loved. For using your privilege for justice instead of for harm. For choosing us." Stella's consulting firm, Justice in Development, expanded rapidly. She was contacted by communities across the country facing gentrification. She developed strategies to help residents maintain ownership and control. She became a voice in media spaces, explaining systemic racism and displacement in ways that made privileged audiences uncomfortable and affected communities hopeful. Marcus expanded his organizing work. He trained other community leaders. He built coalitions across neighborhoods. He testified before city council about predatory development practices. His work earned him respect not just in Westbrook, but across Chicago. One evening, Stella came home to their modest Westbrook apartment with news. "I'm pregnant," she said. Marcus lifted her up and spun her around, then set her down carefully, suddenly aware of her vulnerability. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified and excited," Stella said honestly. "I'm thinking about what it means to raise a child here in this community, with your history, with my privilege, with all the complications." "We'll figure it out," Marcus said. Together. Their son, born the following spring, was named James Marcus Washington Cole. He had his father's mahogany skin and his mother's blonde hair, a visible embodiment of their union. He was born in Westbrook Hospital, attended by a midwife who'd grown up in the community. He was welcomed by a community that had learned to see interracial love not as threat but as possibility. Marcus took 3 months off work to be with Stella and James. He watched his wife learn motherhood with the same intensity she brought to justice work. He saw their son grow and change. He felt the specific weight of raising a black child in America, of teaching him pride in his heritage, of preparing him for a world that would sometimes see him as a threat because of his race. When Stella went back to work, Marcus hired a nanny from Westbrook, a woman named Louise who'd raised her own children there and understood the community. Stella and Marcus were intentional about every choice, about ensuring that James was raised knowing both his parents' legacies, his mother's commitment to justice, his father's fight for community, and both of their love that transcended systems designed to keep them separate. By the time James was 2 years old, the Westbrook Resident Protection Fund had helped 40 families purchase homes. Property displacement had dropped by 70%. Young people who'd left were coming back, investing in their community. Businesses were opening that were owned by residents, not outside investors. The neighborhood was transforming, but in a way controlled by its own people. Stella's book, Choosing Justice, One Woman's Journey from Privilege to Purpose, was published and became a bestseller. In it, she detailed her awakening, her relationship with Marcus, her decision to reject family wealth, and her commitment to dismantling systems that had enriched her. The book was controversial. Some praised her courage. Others called her a traitor to her class. Many white readers were uncomfortable with her honest examination of racism and privilege. But many readers also wrote to Stella, sharing their own journeys toward justice, their own decisions to reject complicity, their own attempts to love across difference and fight alongside marginalized communities. Marcus read the book late at night after Stella and James had gone to sleep. He cried when he read her description of falling in love with him, how she'd learned to see not just an activist, but a man, not just a symbol, but a person. He felt the weight of her sacrifice and the beauty of her choice to sacrifice it. By 2027, 5 years after Stella had first driven into Westbrook and met Devon Washington, the neighborhood had transformed. Not perfectly. Systemic racism doesn't disappear through individual effort, but visibly, measurably, meaningfully. The Westbrook Community Development Trust now owned 50% of residential properties in the neighborhood. Residents controlled development decisions. Displacement had nearly ceased. Young people were staying. Families were building futures. Stella and Marcus had purchased a beautiful brownstone in the heart of Westbrook, renovating it themselves with help from community members. Their home was filled with art by local artists, books about justice and resistance, photos of their wedding, pictures of James. James was now 4 years old, with his father's mahogany skin and curly dark hair, his mother's green eyes and his father's features. He was being raised bilingual in justice, understanding both his mother's world of privilege and his father's world of struggle, learning that love could bridge difference, that justice was both personal and systemic. Marcus had been offered a position on Chicago's city council. He accepted it with Stella's support, understanding that his work in Westbrook had prepared him to advocate for communities across the city. "I don't want to leave Westbrook," Marcus told Stella before accepting. "You're not leaving," Stella said. "You're expanding. You're taking what we learned here and helping other communities do the same thing." Patricia Washington, now 72, watched her son prepare for this new chapter. She'd lived to see Marcus transform from an angry activist to a visionary leader. She'd lived to see him find love with someone who challenged him daily to grow. She'd lived to see her grandson, a beautiful embodiment of a new possibility. "I'm proud of you," Patricia told Marcus the night before his city council swearing in. "I'm proud of the man you became and the love you found." At the ceremony, both Stella's and Marcus's families were present. Patricia Washington sat in the front row, tears streaming down her dark face. Stella's father's best friend sat nearby, the only representative of Stella's biological family willing to support her choices. Devon Washington, who'd first spoken truth to Stella on a Westbrook street, stood with the community members cheering. Marcus was sworn in as alderman for the 32nd Ward, representing Westbrook and surrounding communities. His first act was to introduce legislation requiring community input in all development projects and protecting residents from predatory investment practices. Stella continued her consulting work, but she also became more visible in media and speaking engagements. She was invited to universities to speak about complicity and justice. She was asked to advise corporations on authentic diversity and community accountability. She used her privilege and platform to amplify community voices and center indigenous and marginalized perspectives. One evening, sitting on their brownstone's front porch as James played safely in their small yard, Marcus and Stella reflected on their journey. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked. "Giving up everything for this?" "Every single day," Stella said, and Marcus's heart dropped until she continued. "Because what I gave up was so small compared to what I gained. I gave up luxury and gained purpose. I gave up isolation and gained community. I gave up a life built on harm and gained a life built on love." "What about your mother?" Marcus asked gently. Stella's expression became sad. Patricia Morrison had never acknowledged her daughter's transformation. She'd cut off contact completely, refusing to see her grandson, refusing to acknowledge Stella's choices. It was a loss that Stella carried, but not one that changed her path. She made her choice, Stella said, and I made mine. I've grieved that relationship, but I can't unknow what I know. I can't pretend the system is neutral. I can't go back. Marcus pulled Stella close, kissing the top of her blonde head. "Thank you for not going back. Thank you for staying." It was a Tuesday morning in September 2027, almost exactly 5 years after Stella's GPS had died on a Westbrook street. She stood in the community center, now a thriving hub that served 5,000 residents weekly, watching as Marcus spoke to a group of young activists from across Chicago. Marcus, at 52, was still powerful, still committed, still fierce in his pursuit of justice. His dark eyes burned with the fire of someone who'd spent his entire life fighting for what's right. Beside him stood Stella, now 44, pale skin marked by sun exposure from years of outdoor community work, blonde hair no longer perfectly styled but pulled back practically. Their love was no longer new. It had survived tests that would have broken most relationships. It had survived family rejection, community skepticism, systemic opposition. It had survived the specific challenges of an interracial relationship in America, where stares still happened, where racism still operated, where their union was still seen by some as either threat or spectacle. But they loved each other simply now. Not as symbols, not as redemption narratives. Just as two people who'd chosen each other and continued choosing each other every day. James, now 5 years old, attended Westbrook Community School, the public school they'd helped revitalize through resident involvement and equitable funding. He played with children from every background, learning that diversity was normal, that justice was something you fought for, that love transcended difference. The Westbrook model was being replicated in 6 other neighborhoods across Chicago. Similar community development funds had been established. Communities were gaining control over their own futures. It wasn't fast. It wasn't complete. But it was real. Stella's consulting firm had grown to include 12 consultants, most of them from marginalized communities. They worked with communities across the country facing displacement. They advised cities on equitable development. They helped residents protect their homes and their heritage. Marcus had become a vocal advocate for police reform, housing justice, and community accountability. He'd worked with city officials to establish community oversight boards. He'd pushed through legislation protecting renters from predatory practices. He'd made enemies among developers and establishment politicians. But he'd also changed laws. That morning, as they watched young people gather to learn about community organizing, Harold Jackson entered the community center. He was now 81, moving slowly but still vital in spirit. Harold had become the living memory of Westbrook's history, teaching young people about what had been lost and what they could build. "You did it," Harold told Stella and Marcus. "You actually did it. You transformed this neighborhood without destroying it. You invited outside resources without losing community control. You loved across the divide without erasing it." "We didn't do it alone," Marcus said, pulling Harold close. "We did it together, with this community, with residents, with people willing to fight for justice." That evening, Stella and Marcus took James to the Westbrook Community Garden, where residents grew food and built community simultaneously. They planted seeds with him, teaching him about growth, patience, investment in the future. Marcus told him stories about his grandfather, who'd worked the land despite systems designed to keep him from accumulating wealth. Stella told him stories about using privilege differently, about choosing community over comfort. "Why do you help my dad?" James asked Stella, his young mind making connections. "Because justice is better than comfort," Stella said simply. "Because your dad fights for people who can't fight alone. Because love means using what you have to help people you love." "Do you love Dad more than your family?" James asked. The direct question only a child could ask. "I love your dad, and I chose to build my life here," Stella said. "Your dad's community became my family. That's love too, choosing family." Later, after James had fallen asleep, Stella and Marcus sat on their brownstone stoop, watching Westbrook's streets. Children played safely, something that hadn't been possible when gentrification was threatening displacement. Adults gathered on stoops and in parks. Music drifted from various directions. The neighborhood was alive in a way that prosperity alone couldn't create. It was alive because it belonged to itself. "Do you think we changed the system?" Marcus asked. "We changed this part of it," Stella said. "We didn't solve racism or gentrification or displacement. But in Westbrook, people have power. They have homes. They have futures. That matters." "It matters that you're here," Marcus said, taking her hand. "It matters that you chose us." "It matters that you love me. It matters that you let me," Stella replied. "It matters that you trusted me despite every reason not to. It matters that you saw me as a person and not just a symbol of privilege." They sat together as the sun set over Westbrook, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. 5 years ago, Stella had been lost in this neighborhood, uncertain of direction. Now she was rooted here, purposeful, loved. 5 years ago, Marcus had been fighting alone against systems designed to destroy his community. Now he fought alongside a partner, alongside residents, alongside a movement. The work continued. Racism hadn't been solved. Systemic inequality persisted. Gentrification was still happening in other neighborhoods. But in Westbrook, people controlled their own futures. In Westbrook, love bridged divides. In Westbrook, justice was possible. Stella squeezed Marcus's hand, and he turned to kiss her forehead. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd chosen each other, built a life together, fought for justice together, and discovered that love was possible across every divide. If you were willing to do the work, sacrifice the comfort, and choose justice over privilege,